Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone on Zoom. Um, this is Dominic Clay here, and I am bringing salutations from the Manil Collection. I was asked to come along and give a talk with Melissa Aytenfisu. She is one of my favorite people. I got a chance to curate her show back in 2020 at the Houston Museum of African American Culture, and that show was dynamic. Unfortunately, it was right in the midst of COVID, and a lot of people really missed out on good work. However, a lot of people did not get to see it in person, but a slew of people got to see it and read about it in the Houston Chronicle and other outlets. So that was a very good look. So, but as long as I can remember, I remember going to the Community Artists Collective, and I think that's the first place that I observed your artwork.
That's right.
And the women's work show there, and since then I've been a fan of her, kind of relaying, seeing her at different events, and us both taking part in the citywide African American Artists Exhibition at the University Museum, put on by 5A at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston. So that was a very good treat just to know her, to know what her work is about, and to see it evolve and what we're all kind of spectating today. So, so I hope that introduction
That was
was
a perfect
good enough.
introduction.
Okay. Well, with us being around one another and kind of seeing each other's work and observing each other's movement within the art world, just I may know, but let them know the gist of this exhibition.
Okay. So this exhibition took me 3 years to create all of this artwork. So 3 years, 33 artworks. And it's mixed media. I find as I grow as an artist, I cannot stick to just one medium. I find myself trying and continuing to experiment with different artworks. And this show is highly influenced by the fact that I did a residency here at the Printing Museum. And I got to use the printing presses that are phenomenal for artists. We have, so for engineers in the audience, some of my brothers are engineers, the mechanics of how these presses work is, and the technology they had to build them is fantastic. So I couldn't stay away from this space. As a resident, I had 24-hour access to these studios, and I used them 24 hours. I brought my kids into the studios when I needed to. And there's a great studio manager here, Jessica Snow. She taught me so much, and whenever machines, they don't make these machines anymore. They don't make parts for these machines. So the printing community in the country, in the United States, is pretty close-knit. They message, they share, hey, I have a Vandercook this, I have an etching press from this year, would you have an idea of how to fix it? So while I was here, they had a lithography press, dusty in the corner, nobody was using it. And I studied lithography, I know how to do it. And I managed to help the studio manager get the lithography press up and running. And I spent so much time using that lithography press, and I loved it. I want to make more lithography. And now that I'm here seeing the show, I haven't been around their studios for a few months, partly because of COVID as well, and I cannot wait to get back into lithography.
I was reading and researching on the history of lithography, and
Yeah.
I read about the Tamarind Institute of Printing, which was one of the largest and most famous institutions dealing with printmaking and mainly lithography.
Yeah.
And during the turn of the 1940s, printmaking was almost obsolete.
Yeah.
Like, people stopped using these mechanical print presses, going more into more automated print techniques, and not being concerned about, the one-man press, where, you have to have this very advanced idea of technology, of mechanics and engineering of the time. So I love that about you, and how you kind of take these things that are thrown away and put value to them. Even in your actual printmaking, when you're with the drawings, that is still printmaking. You taking abandoned objects and still creating beautiful artwork with those objects. So can you talk about that process as well?
Yes, so I have a whole series in the show of portraits from my neighborhood, and these portraits are of, hold on, I got distracted by the Zoom. It says your free meeting will end in 10 minutes. Uh-oh, we have to start another meeting. Sorry, guys. Okay. So these 6 portraits came to be during COVID, and they came to be because of inspiration from printing when you don't have access to a printing press. Like, what were the old school ways of printing? And it's basically mark making over and over with an object, and using ink. It's very simple. You don't have to have all the advanced techniques. So again, during COVID, I didn't have access, but I had access to my neighborhood. I had access to the pieces of objects around me and to my neighbors, and seeing what people were doing during COVID when our lives changed.
Yes.
And people were quarantined in their neighborhoods, staying home, and they turned to projects at home. So all of these 7 artworks are about stuff that people were doing at home. Homeschooling children was one of them. Home DIY projects. My 73-year-old neighbor dug up his whole driveway, replaced it. So while he was doing that, I took photos of him and I used objects from around him to print with. So it became this visceral, like really tactile way of printing, like using my model, the objects around them, the pieces of the earth, branches, dirt, leaves, and making layers with that. So it was really an homage to things that happened during COVID, being at home, working out from home, gardening from home, and just being forced to be still and look at what's around you and the beauty in your own neighborhood. Sometimes we're out chasing the world and trying to find beautiful things in other places when there's beautiful things right around us, and if we take the time to look, we'll see them. And artists, we take the time to look.
One of the things that I think about when I looked at your work as well, I think of Pliny the Younger in his book about natural histories. And within this book, he talked about where the first drawings happened, where the first paintings happened. And he discussed these things, and he discussed these little sister and brother playing. And the sister and brother got a piece of charcoal out of the fire and began to trace each other's shadows within the candlelight. And I feel like when you look at this work, it's shadows of a time period. It's a print of the past. And so, when I look at your work, that's what I think about. Another thing, what I think about, I'm sorry, I'm bringing these now, is, and I brought a few samples today. This is the work of Huey Lee Smith.
Okay.
And Huey Lee Smith's work was primarily about his time during the 40s, and him actually being drafted at the age of 23 and being drafted into the Navy, and him getting out of the Navy, because before that time period he was a prominent artist. He got drafted at the age of 23, got out at the age of 28, and then his career started back, and he had this idea to kind of begin to start doing works about the fears of the Cold War, alienation, abandonment, and abandoned objects. And I want you to look at some of these images here, and what do you see that's kind of reminiscent to your work?
Yeah, exactly. Abandoned.
The ribbons.
The ribbons, flag. Oh, the ribbons, like the COVID caution
Yes.
tape. Wow.
The abandoned places. just like your couch.
That's right, and it's outdoor as well.
Yes.
This is a perfect example, Dominic. I just want to say quickly to the Zoom people, if and when this call ends, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I started it early. We are recording this talk, so it's going to be available on YouTube probably by tomorrow. So I apologize, and I will send everybody the link. So thanks for joining. We're going to continue our conversation, but this is going to end while we're talking. So just know that it will be available when we put it back on. Okay, back to the talk ahead.
All
This
right.
is so true about the outdoor couch.
And even the forward style of painting,
Yeah.
the high yellows that is used within the work.
The contrast.
And so I remember during the opening, I kind of hinted on the lithographs with the kids playing with the caution tape.
Yeah.
And how that caution tape is floating free, dancing within the wind carelessly,
Yeah.
while this landscape is abandoned, or there is no one there. There's a sense of alienation. But that kid, just like the young lady who was jump roping on the abandoned house slab,
Yeah.
is that there is a kinship there with the object and the kid who is running free, just like the one with your son running with the caution tape. You know,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make that relationship kind of visible to you and to let you know that, hey, I'm connected to the work in a way that that I can make these small connections within the art world.
Absolutely.
And the sense of alienation in your work is kind of prevalent as well. You know, because as we all know that during the pandemic, all of us was kind of alone,
Isolated.
and struggling and isolated.
Yeah.
And with the portraits of the women here, it's kind of reminiscent also of the other pieces that you did in Metamorphosis.
Yeah.
Could you talk about those relationships as well?
I can, and I just want to jump back to the caution tape one quickly though. COVID, as an artist, it was tough for everyone, but it produced a lot of material and inspiration. My eyes were wide open as to what was happening around me, and there was so much to pick from because it really changed our world. I had never seen empty playgrounds,
Yeah.
empty everything, and again, visually as an artist, you're seeing this and you want to transfer it. So how do you transfer it? And you pick up on little things. For example, like you said, the caution tape one with this huge background, the bayou behind it, and it's empty. And the same thing for me, it was my experience during COVID is heavily influenced by the fact that I'm a parent. My children were 2 and 4 at the time, 2 and 4, and your lifeline is other families, parks, community, and all of a sudden it's gone. So there was, you know, so for me, I was spending time in these spaces by myself with kids and just like observing how much we had changed and how the world was changing to protect ourselves because the virus, you know, we didn't, at the beginning there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. People didn't know. But so for me, I took that caution tape and it was so, it says caution. It's so concrete, it's so real. It's not conceptual, but you can make it conceptual. And so the image of the playground of one shoe left behind, just a shoe in a playground with caution tape. I feel like that really tells a story of like lost moments of connection and community and outdoor play for children. The one with the chess part, the loss of intergenerational relationships because grandparents were isolated from grandchildren. And those are beautiful relationships that really help. They're productive for both sides of it. And so family members having to visit through windows of elderly homes, they would stop and wave through windows. I mean,
Try to keep that social distance.
Yeah, and that led me to that whole artwork with the words. I never worked so much with words as an artist. I usually work with images, but the printing museum gave me the space to work with words. So I made that whole artwork called Isolation, Alone. You know, and we all experience this new level of being alone.
Yeah.
during COVID.
And so, you know, that right there is kind of a more gloomy side to it, but the colors that you use kind of pick the spirit of it, kind of raise the spirit
Yeah.
up to kind of give you a feeling of hope. And the text that you're using is like poetic, and um, it kind of gives you a sense of hope in the midst of the things that were lost. And you know, speaking of things that were lost and found, let's talk about these
Yeah.
beautiful pieces right here.
These
Film,
installations.
yes.
So I have really branched out with installation, and during the pandemic, there was a moment I was at the grocery store towards the end of the pandemic, and I was paying the clerk, and I saw her for the first time. They had removed these barriers, and it just really shocked me. I said to her in surprise, "You're right there. There's no barrier." And we had a laugh. We had a moment, and I said, "Where are those barriers? Where did they go?" And she pointed. They'd just taken them down that morning. They were in the corner. So I asked the manager, "Could I have them?" And he said, "As I'm an artist, could I have them for making artwork?" He said, "Sure." So my mom and I, my tiny 5'3" mom, helped me put these on the roof of my car, and I had them in my garage. And the first one I painted immediately. I got inspiration right away. I just thought of a body myself on it, and then from there, I did the second one a few months later. But the third one took a little more time, and it finally came together. This is the third one right here that came together at the end. And once I already had two, I knew the third one had to be linked to it. So it gave me the idea of positive, negative space by filling up one, by leaving the other two empty. I continue to use the printmaking. I use money, American dollars, as printing on it to talk about how finances and the economy changed and affected each of us.
So what is the process of the coins? How did you create
The
them?
coins.
How did you just painted the coins and
Oh,
stamped them on? What is the
yeah.
process? Oh,
Yeah, I just
well, it
stamped
came out really good.
Yeah, it worked out well.
Yeah.
And then these were masks that I printed on and used the brayer and printed on there. But I wanted them in a row, and I wanted people in the exhibition to walk in and out of the space. And the intention with hanging these masks and this was to create concrete barriers in an exhibition space with space for the viewer to walk through and to think about all the ways that our lives were cut and changed. Barriers were put up in
Yes.
front of us, and how do we maneuver? So I guess that brings us to the hope, is that human beings are resilient, and
Yes.
we found ways to maneuver
Yes.
through such a difficult time.
Yes. Yes. So,
Yeah.
you know, with me being such a fan of your work, I kind of see these, you know, small things that that could be discussed for ages. But you know, when you're dealing with mixed media in a way of, you know, already pre-existing images, you know, especially in these works here, and the portraits of the women, how did you go about finding those images and incorporating them in a way that you did?
These images were really fun to make for me as an artist. The actual process was really engaging. It felt so good, and at the same time it was meditative, and it brought a strong message. So these three portraits of the women are mixed media collage using Mylar. They're inspired by an artist I've really liked, Wangechi Mutu, and I've tried her style before, and I just keep adding to it and making it my own. And so I have watercolor, I have vitriol paint, I have acrylic paint, and I have found photos, and I have photos I've taken. And each of these three tell a story really about the impact of COVID on women, and there's textiles in all three of them as well. So there's threads, literally threads, that go through all of them. There's the same the same piece of thread material I used in all three to connect them. And they're the different experiences that women had. For example, job security, women leaving the workforce during COVID because of no childcare and having to stay home and take care of children. or working from home. That was really hard. And there's a photo of a woman balancing her computer and then her two children doing their homework. And it was really grueling for women to continue these roles. It really piled on. There's one about this woman here is a friend of mine. She's a pediatrician. She's a black pediatrician. So this one is also about access to healthcare in different communities of color, and the lack of healthcare, the fear of vaccinations because of the history of African Americans being used as guinea pigs for doctors and for programs in the past. So this is still very forefront in minds as a community. And I remember walking down the street in my neighborhood talking about vaccines when they were starting to roll them out, and a neighbor said to me, did you get the vaccine? Are you getting the vaccine? There was this big concern, should we get it or not? Do we trust it or not? Vaccine hesitancy in communities of color comes from trauma.
Yes.
From the Tuskegee experiment, from, I forget the name of the woman that they used her body. Henrietta Lacks, precisely. So this hesitancy, we have to honor it. And there was also, a lot of education and attempts to educate and to share the process, but we have to really be delicate with knowing where those traumas come from. So that's what this one is about. And also, during COVID, we had the George Floyd murder, which was traumatic for the community, and people were, processing that at home alone in this environment of pandemic. So there's an example of a woman being vaccinated. And in the back of all of these, there's maps, because where you were in the world affected how you were allowed to live during COVID, right?
Yes.
So there's maps of the world in all three of these. These ones are pretty heavy. There's like tiny details in each one that I could really talk about. One has domestic abuse was increased during COVID, and so there was posters up on the side of the highway at one point with phone numbers, like call this number if you are experiencing, because people were home, isolating in families, tensions were higher, and so there was all types of little issues that became heightened during COVID, which makes me think about education. And for me, it's important to talk about that COVID really, the crux of the show, COVID masks, it unmasks so many social ills that already existed, but it just like shone a flashlight on them.
Yes, absolutely. And, although, COVID brought a lot of fears, it kind of reinsured the human spirit, the human experience, to allow you to have more faith in your fellow neighbors. Me personally, I can attest to me getting close to my neighbors when we necessarily didn't have a relationship before COVID. We had to kind of rely on one another, and our souls and our spirits kind of returned to a place of yesterday where we were more community reliant, and we now see the benefit of community. And I think that is the voice in which your work speaks from. I remember one of the things that I loved about the Chronicle interview was me talking about you being an artist of the Third Ward, and you solidifying yourself as an artist of the Third Ward. Your son set up a lemonade stand.
He did.
And I was a day late and $1 short on the response to that. But I know I even saw it before you sent it. And I just want to talk about that experience of the benefit of community and how that situation even happened. What made your son want to have a
A
lemonade stand on the 4th of July
Yeah.
to keep everybody hydrated and
Yeah.
caring for his fellow neighbors.
I mean, it's hot in Texas, and community during COVID was important and continues to be important. And I really rely on community, and I work hard to build community. It doesn't come naturally. I wasn't born here. I've been here exactly 10 years in the United States, and you know, growing community, it takes investment, it takes connection, it takes give and take. And so during COVID, I tried to give and take, you know, from neighbors, especially with little ones, so we would share responsibilities. And I have a neighbor that texted me that her and her son were doing a lemonade stand. So we went over to theirs and helped them for a while, and my kids loved it. So we came home, and my daughter can't quite write yet, but she made a list for the grocery store. She drew each item we need. She drew cups, she drew, so we went to H-E-B, we collected our items, and you know, they're at an age, 6 and 7, they're starting to learn about finances and saving and money. So we decided $1 was a fair amount,
Yes.
you know, nice and fair. And we set up our lemonade stand, and again, community, my neighbor is Mr. Square. Mr. Square is always outside tinkering, building, fixing things. And his son drops by, community, again, having children visit their elderly parents. So he had with him in the car NBA draft pick number 4, Amen Thompson. But again, this young man is a NBA sensation, but he's just a neighborhood kid in other ways. And so when he dropped by and they got out of the truck to hang out for a few minutes, it was just like neighbors.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I saw the smile on Tyson's face
Yeah.
in the Chronicle. So, you know, how did he feel about being like in the Chronicle? Like, it's not your mom
I know.
this time, it
It's
is
him. He kept telling me, update me on how many likes I have. What's my update? I was like, let me check.
Yeah.
51,000. He's like, I'm like, that's the size of the city that your grandma's from. It's like, so everybody in the city liked me. I was like, they liked you.
But
So he was proud.
you know, I don't think I have anything else. I think I've exhausted myself with all the questions. And
The only other one I wanted to talk about is, I really did want to talk about education and how that map over there and those 2 artworks really talk to. That was one of the things that during COVID, I think, was a shining example of a problem that we need to fix in this country, and access to education, and how when schools shut down, the school create pods, hire teachers, had a number of stay-at-home parents who were able to continue teaching and making sure their children kept at the standard of their grade. Other families, we lean on the system. We need the system to help to teach our children because we're working and whatnot. These parents, we couldn't necessarily hire someone to stay home with kids. We couldn't create these pods because you're working frontline jobs. And so the gap in education widened during COVID. And then it makes you think about funding and access, and why are we putting more money into, why is it they're not completely equal access across the board? Why are certain districts, certain zones getting more? Why can't we have it at just the age of 5, kindergarten kids to have an equal shot to be successful? We know that education sets the path. That's the quote by Malcolm X. Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. And yet we are not giving children in communities of color as much of a chance in education. HISD is Houston Independent School District, 200,000 students, is becoming, I don't know what the stats are on the ratio of white, non-white, Hispanic, but I do know that it's a very diverse school district, and yet 80% of kids are graduating and getting a spot in college, but only 20% go. Not that everyone needs to go to college, but it just shows back to that, school, preschool to prison pipeline, and the disparities, and if anything we could take away from COVID, and there is growth because there are nonprofits that are starting to point this out and say, how can we pour more into these communities? Teachers going out during COVID, knocking door to door to find their students who are dropping out because attendance dropped during COVID. God bless those teachers who are going and doing that and finding students and helping them to continue to succeed. So that artwork is about really the stats, the demographics, this American dream of moving to the suburbs and having access to a good school. Why can't we all have, like, that is one area that if we're gonna pour money into, our taxpayer dollars, that is one area where we could really improve society as a whole. We need educated citizens of every color.
Yes.
And yet it's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
And there are systemic reasons that it's not. And COVID highlighted those. Ability to go to certain schools. I experienced that myself trying to enroll my kids in schools during COVID and which schools I was allowed to send my children to. And the grades and the testing, like there needs to be a great amount of money, hence money. How much money do you give each person as a society? What do we pouring resources into people? That really comes into this one. Like her body's full of dollars and money. How much are we pouring into each person? Are we humanizing people, the experience, or are we just pushing people in some ways to produce, to be part of this materialism that we have? Like, I really feel like we need to pour money into education, and there's better ways to allocate than what we're doing right now.
Yeah, when I look at this piece, I think of, people who are made of common sense.
Yes, literally sense. Yeah, common sense.
Yes.
That would be a great title.
Yes, it would be.
Dominate. Interesting title. This wall is images of Africa. If there's something I could talk about, it's the fact that Africa was such a big question mark during COVID. The question mark was, if this COVID is just decimating us in North America, imagine what's going to happen to Africa. Well, it didn't happen in Africa, and there's the jury's out on why, but some of those things are, for example, a younger population, for one. The average age, I believe, in the continent of Africa is about 19. The average age in North America is 43. That's a huge difference, and we know that COVID attacked the older and the younger. But also, in Africa, they actually have a pretty good public health system and are able to go out to clinics and educate people. Secondly, more people live outside, more rural, so less spread. Thirdly, the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of African cultures and community, the elderly people live at home with their families, whereas here in North America, we put all elderly people together in a nursing home, in a seniors home. That was where some of the first big sweeping deaths were in the pandemic, were how quickly COVID was being passed in these seniors' homes, and that didn't happen in other countries.
And not to mention diet.
And diet and exercise, absolutely. That's I forgot to.
They're just working. They're just working every day. They're just active every day to where we call it working out.
Yeah.
But that is a part of their life. It's just the everyday rituals of existing in a community.
Yes.
So
I'm happy to see that Africa withstood a lot of the ills that we were facing here. And of course, it's not easy anywhere in the world. There's many challenges in Africa as well for them. But that did bring me to write hope, because I do feel like there's hope on the continent of Africa and across the world. We are resilient people. So I did want to finish on a note of hope.
All right. During every time I do an artist talk with an artist, I like to ask them, if you have anything that you would like to say to the younger people, because you're a mother, you have a history of education. What are the things that you would kind of tell the younger people who have a desire to be an artist and think that they can't do it? What is your advice to them?
My advice to young people who want to pursue the arts is to be disciplined. You have to be disciplined. I felt like it took a lot of discipline for me to create this show. Sometimes we think there's this funny stigma of artists, that artists just go with the flow and stay up late and do artwork late into the night and are free flowing and partying and then they create art magically. This is not the case. Professional artists, if you look at their lifestyle, they are disciplined. They may work at different hours. Yes, you might get inspiration in different ways, but it takes a lot of discipline to take an idea that you have, bring it to fruition, find grants, find programming, find opportunities to improve your skills as an artist, surround yourself with other amazing artists like Dominic. You do need a community as an artist. Go to events, go to shows, get to know other artists. We learn so much from each other. I learn so much from you every time we talk, for the fact that you brought this and tied it to other artists. Learn about the history of your medium. Learn about what artists were doing before you. Learn about what they're doing now in this moment. Have conversation with other artists. Learn what they're doing. Dominic is creating, he changes his work. He's working in sculpture now. He's working in the mill. His knowledge of art history always leaves me with learning something. So discipline and a yearning for knowledge, I think, is important. So that would be my advice to young artists.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the sentiment is returned. I learned so much as well. So it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
And thank you guys for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you at another art event New Year.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.